What if the most explosive royal revelation was never about a title, a throne, or a public comeback, but about a father desperately trying to stop his two sons from becoming permanent strangers? According to the account in the source script, Princess Anne delivered a message that reportedly left William and Harry facing the one thing royal protocol could never solve for them: each other. And the detail that makes this so devastating is that the king's final wish apparently came with a boundary. Harry could still belong to the family, but that did not automatically mean a return to the working monarchy.
I think more shock and dauntingness was more the feeling I felt, but it was, the thing is, it's
Princess Anne had spent a lifetime protecting the crown by knowing exactly when not to speak, but this time, silence was no longer an option. In a private Windsor gathering with Prince William and Prince Harry sitting only feet apart, Anne revealed a final wish entrusted to her by the king, a deeply personal instruction concerning his sons, the future of the monarchy, and a family fracture he refused to leave unresolved. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne held herself together because that was what the king had always trusted her to do. She had never been the loudest voice in the family, and that restraint was why personal matters reached her hands. The crown, meaning the monarchy and the duties carried in its name, demanded discipline before emotion. Yet even she seemed changed by what she was about to say. William listened without interrupting as she delivered the central message. The king's final wish was simple but brutal. The brothers were to reconcile personally before the future king assumed the burden of preserving the monarchy. While Harry would be offered one private place inside the family, but no automatic return as a senior working royal. That distinction was the first bombshell. The message, as presented in the source, was not promising Harry a grand royal comeback. It was separating something the family had apparently allowed to become hopelessly tangled. Being a son and brother was one question, while holding an official position was another, and that difference landed hard. Harry's expression tightened. Affection was still there, but so was a boundary. His father, according to the account, wanted him close enough to remain family, yet not simply restored to the position he had once occupied. William faced a completely different kind of shock. For William, reconciliation was not some sentimental handshake for the cameras. It meant reopening years of anger, disappointment, accusations, distrust, and silence that had become easier to endure than confront. Then came the detail that made the entire revelation feel even heavier. Anne reportedly explained that a private account prepared at the king's request deliberately separated Harry's place within the family from Harry's place inside the working monarchy. Those two questions were never supposed to have the same answer. That meant one door could potentially open while another remained firmly shut. William pushed his chair backward. Harry lowered his eyes. Anne placed the sealed instructions between them. And then she revealed something even more unsettling. One passage remained unread. Why? Because the king's concern, according to the account, was apparently much bigger than whether Harry returned emotionally to the family. He was worried about what unresolved warfare between his sons could eventually do to William when the full weight of the crown fell upon him. That changes the entire story. This was no longer simply about two brothers who had fallen out. It was about a future king carrying an institutional burden while simultaneously carrying a family wound that had never truly healed. William had spent years learning to control his emotions, absorb crises, and keep moving. But reconciliation with Harry demanded something royal duty could not manufacture: trust. Harry stood on the opposite side of that divide. He was outside the working royal structure, yet emotionally, according to the source account, he had never completely left the family. That contradiction had followed him for years. He could reject the institution and still grieve the loss of his place inside it. He could remain angry while still wanting to know whether his father and brother genuinely considered him one of their own. Harry reportedly gave Anne a different confession. Hearing that the king still wanted him close was almost unbearable because it suggested something he may have feared was already dead. The affection had survived even though the official role had not. And then Anne disclosed another crucial concern from her conversations with the monarch. The king feared Harry might eventually interpret distance as rejection, but he also feared William might begin to believe that responsibility meant he could no longer afford vulnerability. That is where this supposed final wish becomes far more explosive than a simple family reunion. Harry reached toward the sealed instructions, apparently wanting the answer immediately. William placed his hand over them before the folder could move. Then came a small gesture that, in the context of this story, carried enormous weight. William wanted them to hear the rest together. No reading ahead, no private interpretation, no discovering their father's intentions separately and turning those intentions into another weapon between them. For the first time, neither brother was trying to control the message alone, but the king's final wish had not appeared from nowhere. According to the source account, one private family confrontation had convinced him that time itself was becoming dangerous. The feud had stopped looking temporary. Distance had become routine. Silence had become easier than honesty. The evening after that confrontation became the moment the entire situation reportedly stopped being about another disagreement and became about what might survive after the king. According to the source account, the gathering at Windsor had begun as another carefully managed family conversation, but the atmosphere changed almost immediately. Harry challenged William over trust, arguing that every disagreement seemed to become evidence that nothing between them could ever be repaired. William pushed back with a devastating point: trust could not survive repeated wounds simply because the family wanted peace. Charles tried to slow the exchange, but neither son was prepared to retreat. William left first, Harry followed moments later, and neither said goodbye to their father. That detail was apparently what shattered Charles most. He remained seated after the room emptied, confronting something far more frightening than anger itself. The anger had become normal, and that is where the story takes its darkest turn. Charles reportedly told Princess Anne that his greatest fear was not that his sons were still furious with each other, but that they were learning to live comfortably with the estrangement. Think about that. Anger can eventually burn itself out. Arguments can end. But when two people become accustomed to silence, the silence can become permanent. According to the account, Charles no longer sounded like a monarch thinking only about succession. He sounded like a father who had realized that power could command loyalty, but it could never command love. That distinction apparently stayed with him. He asked Anne to preserve a private instruction and deliver it only if the division reached a point where delay itself became dangerous. Now that moment had arrived. Anne looked at both brothers and reportedly explained that their father's instructions were not simply about what each man should receive or surrender. The instruction also contained what they were expected to say to each other. Suddenly, there was nowhere left to hide behind advisors, public appearances, or carefully controlled royal language. No press officers could soften the words. No public statement could rewrite the meaning. Just William and Harry in the same room, carrying years of resentment that had survived every previous attempt to contain it. Anne remained only long enough to repeat the king's instruction. Neither man was to leave before speaking honestly. Then the door closed. And for perhaps the first time in years, William and Harry had nowhere to retreat except into the truth. William understood that this was not supposed to be some theatrical reconciliation designed to calm public speculation. According to the account, Charles had rejected the idea of a staged gesture. He wanted the anger exposed before either son could hide behind duty again. Harry spoke first, accusing William of deciding long ago that trust could never return. William answered without raising his voice, telling Harry that trust had not been destroyed in one dramatic instant and therefore could not be rebuilt in one conversation simply because their father demanded honesty. Harry fired back that every attempt to cross the divide seemed to arrive already judged. William responded that every new wound made the old ones harder to ignore. For several tense moments, the argument reportedly centered on roles, loyalty, public statements, and the damage that had followed them. Then something changed. The institutional language began to disappear. William admitted that anger had become easier than disappointment. Harry admitted that resentment had become easier than acknowledging how deeply the distance hurt. Neither wanted vulnerability because vulnerability felt too close to surrender. Yet that was apparently exactly what Charles had understood. William then revealed a private warning Charles had given him months earlier: never confuse becoming sovereign with becoming emotionally unreachable. The warning mattered because power can make distance look like strength. Harry fell silent before admitting the truth he had resisted for years. What he wanted most was not necessarily a restored royal role. He wanted proof that he still mattered to his father, and painfully, that he still mattered to his brother. William did not promise instant forgiveness. Harry did not demand it. But the hostility stopped controlling every sentence. Then the door opened and Anne returned carrying the second part of the king's instructions. Her expression reportedly made one thing obvious: the hardest boundary had not yet been spoken. Charles wanted reconciliation, but he had also decided exactly where family healing must end and royal authority must must begin. The emotional battle had finally cracked open the silence, but the king's wish was never only about healing. It was also about drawing a line that could not be crossed simply because two brothers were hurting. And that line was brutal in its simplicity. Harry could be welcomed emotionally back into the family without automatically being restored to the working monarchy. If Charles wanted William to preserve the relationship, not recreate the past. Family reconciliation could mean rebuilding personal trust. Royal restoration meant formal duties, responsibilities, and public service. They were never the same thing. That distinction left Harry facing the most painful question of all. Could he accept belonging without demanding power? And William faced the opposite question. Could he protect the future monarchy without allowing duty to permanently destroy his relationship with his brother?